I worked with some of the most traumatized, most difficult to connect with kids. I found myself more triggered by my then 2-year-old than I was by these 18-year-old boys who were calling me names and threatening to hit me with chairs. I was like, oh, no wonder these parents are still suffering through these meltdowns, because they have no idea what to do in the moment when their kid just completely loses it. They don't have any tools. I could do the best play therapy in the world and it still wouldn't make a difference in the meltdowns. This work is truly everything. It's how you raise a kid who's resilient to life's many stressors. Families who've been suffering for years change their family dynamic. Hello and welcome to Raised Resilient, where I help you end the constant meltdowns and reclaim your peace without relying on punishments, bribes, or yelling. I'm Dr. Hillary Manzik, clinical psychologist, parenting coach, and mom of 3 kids with very big feelings, and I am so glad you're here. So it's been a while since I have told my story, the story of how I became a parenting coach, the story of how I, even as a child psychologist who spent my entire career working with other people's kids, struggled so much as a first-time mom to a kid who felt his feelings in a really big way. He still does. And most recently, this wasn't part of my story last time I shared my story on the podcast, which has been years now, why I closed my successful private therapy practice that had a wait list and was always full to go full on into parent coaching. So starting at the beginning, I spent my entire career working with kids. And specifically, I worked with some of the most traumatized, most difficult to connect with kids in settings like residential treatment centers and therapeutic schools. I worked in a psychoanalytic therapeutic preschool, which is a hard thing to find. There's only, I think, a couple of them in the whole country. And I was really good at this work. I was able to connect with kids that nobody else was able to find inroads with, right? The kinds of kids who were always the difficult kid, the one who was always in trouble. Specifically, at one of the residential treatment centers I worked with, this was up in New England, there were these 12-foot rocks all over the place, and these were the kids that would go on top of that rock and refuse to get down unless somebody was able to really come in and connect with them. And I was that person. Right? I was able to connect with these kids when nobody else could. And so I thought when I became a mom that I was just going to be a natural, right? Like I was able to stay calm with these kids. Specifically, I worked with teenage boys in residential treatment when I was maybe 23 myself. And these boys would call me every name in the book, every curse word they could think of. And I just stayed calm. I was able to stay regulated. I remember one of my child psychology professors in grad school, when I was getting my doctorate, was like, you know, when you do child therapy, it is going to drag you through your childhood by the hair. And what he was really saying is that I was going to feel triggered. I was going to feel all these big emotions because of the kids I was working with. And I didn't really find that to be true. I found myself able to stay grounded and steady. Like I knew these kids were just having a hard time, even if it was coming out at me in these really big ways. Even then, even as a 23-year-old, I was able to see that and I was able to stay calm, and the kids loved that. They felt safe with me. They're like, how do you always stay so calm? So I thought for sure when I became a mom, I was like, I got this. Like this is gonna be so easy. Spoiler alert, it was not. When I had my first child, he was absolutely a deeply feeling kid, right? Like very much highly sensitive, big emotions. And I found myself more triggered by my then 2-year-old than I was by these 18-year-old boys who were calling me names and, you know, threatening to hit me with chairs and all the things. And I was like, what is going on? How am I struggling this much? How am I finding myself so thrown off by this tiny little person? Because as it turns out, parenting did drag me by the hair through my own childhood, to quote my professor, right? Parenting was the thing that made me face all my own stuff in a way that child therapy just never really did. So he would have these big meltdowns. He would scream at me to go away, and I'd think, okay, sure. And I would say, I'll give you some space. And then he would scream at me, no, come back. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help you. I remember there was this one day, he was maybe 2.5, and I decided I was going to take him to lunch with my friend. Now, it was his nap time, and I was like, yeah, I should probably get him home and take a nap. I should probably not push this, but I needed adult time. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time, and I was like, I got to get out of the house. We need to go out to lunch. We're going to do this. He'll be fine. He was not fine. He had a massive meltdown. This was at one of those Great Harvest bread companies. So I don't know if you've ever been to a Great Harvest bread company, but there's like all of these little cookies and snacks in the line. And so they were right at his eye level, and he was starving and he was hangry and he was tired. So he kept picking up the things, and I kept having to be like, nope, we're not getting that. Nope, we're not getting that. Playing whack-a-mole with all the things that he wanted to buy until he just absolutely lost his marbles. Like, he threw himself on the floor. He was kicking and screaming. We're still in line. Like, we haven't even placed our order. And I knew, at least I knew that we needed to leave. So that was good. I did actually pick him up, and I knew we got to cut our losses. We can't keep pushing through this. But I did not do this from a place of sturdiness. I did not do this from a place of being grounded, from knowing that my kid was just having a hard time, not giving me a hard time. I took this very personally. I felt embarrassed. I was like, everybody's looking at me. How could you do this to me? How could you act this way? And I will never forget buckling him into his car seat. I was so mad, and I was like gritting my teeth, and I was like, I can't believe you did that. This little 2-year-old child. Like, if I look back at the person who stood with these teenage boys in residential treatment and was able to take all of their curse words and all of their insults and just let it roll off me, and then I think of the person buckling that 2-year-old into his car seat, two very different people, even though it was me. Both were me. But I was so triggered by my little boy. We drove home. I put him down for a nap, and I legit cried myself to sleep that night because I felt like the worst mom in the world. I felt like I was failing him on every level. Like, I knew outside the moment that he wasn't trying to be difficult. And I could even see in retrospect, like, yeah, I probably should have just taken him home and put him down for a nap. That's not his fault. But I still reacted to him in this way that just did not feel good to me. I remember thinking I was completely messing him up. And I knew there's got to be a better way to do this, right? There's got to be a better way to parent this child. And the reality is, I myself was absolutely a sensitive, deeply feeling child. And I can look back on these memories that I have as a child where I would say or do something and an adult would react harshly. Maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was my parent, maybe it was the people at the in-home daycare where I went after half-day kindergarten. Remember that? Any of you who went to half-day kindergarten? And I remember these adults would just like react to me in these harsh ways. And I can still remember where I was standing in those moments, right? Those moments left an impact on me. They made me feel like I was too much. My feelings were too much for the adults who were there to care for me. And I knew I did not want my son growing up with that weight of like being too much for the people who love you the most, right? So I went back to everything that I knew because I had the knowledge, right? I had the textbook knowledge. I understood attachment theory. I understood what it meant to show up for a child in a regulated way. I was doing it in all my jobs, right? I understood child development. I understood neuroscience. But it wasn't about knowledge. It was about actually embodying some of these ideas. So I went back to what I knew. And I went back to Peter Fonagy's work on mentalization in parenting, right? This idea that if we want to change how we're showing up as parents, we need to be able to reflect on our parenting. How are we showing up? Does it feel good? What might be causing us to yell, to be reactive, right? To take our kids' behavior personally, even if we know better. So I shifted my parenting. And I wish I could tell you like, oh, I did this and it took, a week and I was where I wanted to be. No, this was a process that took years. And I would argue it's a work in progress for all of us. And I am still every day working to be conscious of how I show up. That being said, he's 11 now, my oldest, and he's thriving. We have an amazing relationship. And I would say that so much of showing up for him the way I want to comes naturally now in a way that it didn't then. And so if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, so it's always going to be hard, it's always going to take effort to show up without yelling and screaming and taking my kid's behavior personally, it will always require some conscious effort from you, but it will not always be hard. And it will become more and more and more natural the more you do it. So fast forward to 2018. I opened my own private therapy practice. This is how I re-entered the workforce after having 2 kids at the time. I have 3 now, but I knew that I wanted to start my own practice. I knew that I wanted to serve my community. I was excited about this. And in my private practice, I was getting so many referrals for kids who were, let me know if any of this sounds familiar, having daily meltdowns. Sometimes they would last hours. Hitting, kicking, screaming, throwing things, telling their parents, I hate you, you're the worst, I want a new family. Constantly needing their parents to be right next to them, doing things that they could totally do on their own, like brush their teeth or get dressed in the morning. Falling apart over the tiniest things, going from 0 to 60. And these parents didn't know what else to do. So they did what most of us would do, the logical thing to do, which was call the local child therapist and get the child into therapy. So I was seeing these kids and I did what I was trained to do and what I think I was actually really good at, which was play therapy. And we would get on the floor in my playroom and we would do all kinds of work in the displacement, which really just means playing through some of the themes in their lives. And I thought, wow, we're doing this really great play therapy. We're addressing all of these things. And then I would get text messages or emails from the parents with videos of that child, that same child who did great in my therapy office, having a massive meltdown later that night. And they were like, this is not working. Help. What do we do? And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh, well, no wonder these parents are still suffering through these meltdowns because they have no idea what to do in the moment when their kid just completely loses it. They don't have any tools. And likely, if they're anything like me, they are triggered as all get out in these moments, right? They're taking their kid's behavior personally. They're trying to stop the feelings because that's how we were parented. So I knew, I had this light bulb moment. I was like, of course the meltdowns aren't stopping. I'm with this kid 45 minutes a week, and the other 167 hours and 15 minutes, I am not there. And the parent is the one, boots on the ground, dealing with these meltdowns. The parent is also their secure attachment figure, the person that they go to, their safe person. They don't need me to co-regulate with them during the meltdowns. They don't even show me the meltdowns. They hold it together in my office just like they do at school. How many of you have a kid who the teacher is just like, we don't know what you're talking about. She's an angel at school, right? And I had this light bulb moment. I was like, I understand why nothing's changing at home. I could do the best play therapy in the world, and it still wouldn't make a difference in the meltdowns. So I took a brave leap. I was like, you know what? We are going to change how we do things. This is my business. This is my practice. I can do what I want, right? And so for my new referrals, I started mandating, if I'm going to see your kid in therapy, I'll do that, absolutely. But you also need to come in and meet with me separately for at least 8 parent sessions. And that number 8 came from the fact that I was at the time using the Circle of Security Parenting framework, which is 8 weeks long. So that's where that number came from. It's not a magic number, but it was enough time that the parents would come in and be committed to a process versus just having one session where they vent and tell me all the things that are hard. And then we all walk away and nobody's really got any tools, right? That was what I was doing before I started mandating that parents come in and work with me for 8 weeks. I would do these one-off parenting consultations, and they were so much fun for me. I would just share all my knowledge about parenting, and I would be like, oh, no, this is what you need to do instead. But there was no cohesive framework, and it was really just this session where I feel like these poor parents were drinking from a fire hose. I'm telling them everything I know about parenting. They're telling me everything they're struggling with, and there's no support to iterate and put that into practice. So when I was meeting with parents over 8 weeks, that is the first time that I started to hear things like, I've got a different kid. What did you do? And I was thinking, I didn't do anything. It was what you did. It's the work that you did. It's the shifts that you made as a result of our work together that actually got these meltdowns to stop. So fast forward to COVID, which kind of forced my hand with respect to seeing kids in play therapy. We tried to see kids over a video session, I got a lot of tours of people's houses, but not a lot of therapy happened, as you can probably guess. So I ultimately took that as my sign to stop seeing the kids altogether. And I thought, what if I just do parenting work? Like, what if I drop the rest of it and I just see parents? And guess what? I got the same results. I didn't even have to see the kids. Like, I saved the parents. Obviously, at the time, we were doing it virtually, but eventually the world opened back up, and I was able to save these parents the stress of picking their kid up early from school, because I never was able to offer evening hours because I got my own kids, right? Picking their kid up from school, taking them to my office, driving through rush hour traffic, maybe bargaining with the kid to go because kids don't always want to go to therapy. I was able to save the parents all of that and just meet with them virtually, the whole thing over a camera, and I got amazing results. But I realized a couple of holes in that process. One, every framework that I ever taught, including Circle of Security, which I think is amazing, there were holes in those frameworks. Things that parents would ask me, and I would think, yeah, you're right, this framework does not address that. And I found that one of the common threads that was missing was, like, parents would say, okay, I get what I should do, right? I have all the information. I follow all the people on Instagram. I'm saving all the reels. Like, I know that my kid is not trying to give me a hard time. Like, I understand that intellectually, but I still yell. My kid's still having meltdowns. I don't know how to stop the actual meltdowns from happening. And the other hole that I recognized was, more than the frameworks, the parents were having to save up their questions for me. They would see me once a week, and sometimes the kid would have had a meltdown on Wednesday, and then we meet the following Tuesday. At this point, it's been 6 days, and the parent's like, yeah, I mean, I can't really remember exactly what happened on Tuesday, or on Wednesday of last week, but I think it was this or that. And they're saving up their questions, and I'm spending the whole session reacting to their questions, right? Oh, okay, you have this question, let me teach you this framework. You have this question, here's how I would handle that. And I realized, I was like, what if I wrote my own curriculum? What if I took the best of what is working and I close the gaps? I fill the holes that these other frameworks are not addressing. What if I build a program that actually helps people go from, I know this intellectually, to I feel it in my body? Like, I show up in this belief that I have a good kid who's struggling. And so I did. I built the framework. I built the curriculum. And that way, people were able to consume my curriculum and ask me questions about it and iterate about how to apply that framework with their specific kid in that specific moment at 6 p.m. when everybody's losing their ish and everyone's exhausted and mom's triggered and dad's yelling. What do we do in that moment? How do we apply this framework in that one-off situation? So instead of reacting to parents once a week in sessions, they could consume my framework on their own time, while commuting, while walking, while doing the dishes, right? And then they can message me whenever they need me. So that instead of us sitting down once a week, we're talking all week long. So when that meltdown happens on Wednesday night, they're able to pick up their phone and say, okay, this just happened. Let's walk through how we could have responded differently. And what I found when I changed the way I was helping parents from a once a week session through my therapy practice to a curated coaching program through my parent coaching business was honestly astonishing even to me. Because what I saw was not just that the parents were like, oh, I know what to do now, but they would say things to me like, hey, my kid hasn't had a meltdown in like 4 or 5 days. I don't want to jinx it, but he hasn't had a meltdown I can't remember the last time. It's been weeks. And eventually they would say, my kid hasn't had a meltdown since week 2 of your program. I did not think it was possible to actually end the meltdowns until I saw it happening for these families that I was working with. And here's the thing. When I saw an approach that was working so much faster and honestly so much easier for parents to consume than meeting with me once a week, the only ethical thing for me to do was to lean into that. If I found a way to help people that was better and faster and more comprehensive, I would be crazy and not as helpful as I could be if I didn't lean into that. So I made the very scary but very best decision I could at the time to close my therapy practice. And I haven't looked back. That was July of 2023. That is when I hosted my first cohort in the Chaos to Connection parent coaching program that I now see hundreds of families in every single year. And honestly, I continue to be humbled and honored and just honestly amazed at the results that we have. Like, I've got a client who has a 12-year-old who was having daily aggressive meltdowns and had been using punishments and control-based parenting tactics for this child's entire life and for his older siblings. And it just got to the point where it wasn't working. It was apparent that those strategies were not helping them end the meltdowns. The meltdowns were actually getting worse. 2 weeks of working together, and they haven't had a meltdown since. I talked to her just the other day, and not only are they not having meltdowns, but he's like willingly doing chores and participating in family activities and practicing his instrument and going to sports practices, all things that he was completely resisting before. It's wild. It is wild, the change that is possible. And in weeks, families who've been suffering for years change their family dynamic and their relationship with their kid and end the meltdowns to the level that is developmentally appropriate. Okay, so if you have a 3-year-old, they're not gonna never have a meltdown again. But I will tell you, it should not be every day, and it should not last for hours, even with a 2 or a 3-year-old. So we break out of that cycle of constant or daily meltdowns, and it happens so much faster than I would have ever thought possible. So that's my story. That's why I started doing this work. I came by it honestly. I had to figure this out for myself before I was able to teach it to other people. And I can tell you that this work is truly everything. It's how you raise a kid who's resilient to life's many stressors. It's how you raise a kid who's going to know how to be kind and empathic towards their community and their neighbors. And it's how you raise a kid who's going to want to come home and visit you when they're full grown. So look, if this is resonating with you, if you are interested in learning more, I linked a video for you in the show notes. It's called How to End the Meltdowns in 8 Weeks or Less. Check it out. Let me know what you think, and I will catch you in the next episode.